Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today I've got the Two of Cups as the obstacle and the Page of Swords as the opportunity. So let's get started. Um, Two of Cups. The the angle that I approached this card from today was that of relationships with the non-existent, uh, placing agency in something out there in the world. You know, in a lot of cartoons, there will be like an anthropomorphic tree, and it'll have these human qualities, and it'll behave in a way, it'll relate to the main characters in this personable way. Or we'll see these anthropomorphic clouds in cartoons that have a face on them, and the wind comes from them, blowing. Their cheeks get all puffy and they blow, and that's where the wind comes from. And the sun has a little face on it, and it's happy, and that's why it's shining. That kind of shit. Um, this kind of agency overdrive pattern recognition overdrive. This is something that human beings are amazingly good at or bad at, depending on how you look at things. Um, in in the development of the senses, and in our ability to, in the evolution of our ability to predict events. It's my theory anyway, or like a theory that I subscribe to. Is that you know it's it's better to be able to spot the tiger hidden in the bushes, camouflaged by the tall grass or something. It's better to be able to spot that tiger 50% of the time than 25% of the time. The people that could do that outlive the ones that only see it a quarter of the time, right? As this kind of weight or bias on evolution continues throughout, thousands of generations, you get to the point where now it comes down to people who could spot the tiger 100% of the time or 90% of the time. And so the 100%ers, they still win out. But it seems like what's happened with human beings is that our ability to spot the tiger in the bushes, metaphorically speaking, it goes over 100%. It's like 200%, which means that, we see it even when it's not there. Now, I think that from a survival point of view, it still doesn't hurt to be that hyperactively recognizing of patterns, even when they're not what you think it is. I'm sure because sometimes running away from an imaginary tiger in the grass still could have saved you from a real tiger somewhere else. Just generally erring on the side of caution by seeing all these, you know, threats out there in the world. But yeah, but at the point that you're running from a tiger that's not there, what you are running from is this agency that you've essentially created this little god, this tiger god that exists metaphysically, and you treat it with the fear and respect and caution or whatever that real tigers deserve. And I think throughout the millennia, people have taken this and they've applied it to almost everything, right? The weather patterns are they're not just these. I don't even know what you would call it. In the abstract, just empirical manifestations of global weather chain reactions. It's there's some intention behind them. There's an agency, just like the agency of that tiger that is always stalking you, always looking for you. Always have to be vigilant, vigilant when you're in the village. But yeah, so things like weather patterns and things like those phenomena started taking on agency as well, and then people started trying to negotiate with those agencies, and you have you know rain dances and all sorts of rituals that, like, it's amazing to watch psychics, the kind of fake psychics that have been like busted or whatever. It's amazing to see them work on some people because they'll do this thing where they'll say, oh, I'm sensing something from one of your relatives that has passed on to the other side. Their name starts with the letter B, or no, maybe it's a P, or oh, it's a C, a D, E, some sort of E sound, V maybe. And like sometimes you watch these people that are, getting these readings or whatever, and they're just sitting there shaking their head like, no, no, B, no, P, no. And then after like, literally on the 10th letter, they actually get a hit, and then the person is like blown away. They totally don't react in the way that you would imagine someone reacting to a 10% hit ratio. Like it's like, well, you got 9 wrong but you got 1 right. Like that's not something to be blown away by. At that point, 10 letters, you're over a third of the alphabet, right? um, but yeah, but nonetheless, not only do we have this, I think, heightened pattern recognition, but a big part of that is like registering the hits way harder than we register the misses, so that when you want it to rain, every time there's a drought and you do a rain dance, even if they only work like once every 50 times, it's still really easy to think, oh my God, the weather gods do exist. We did the dance and then it rained, right? It's easy to ignore the fact that you also did the dance 14 other times and nothing happened. Um, but yeah, I think this card symbolizes the relationship with the world, and I think it's as it has that potential to represent the relationship with the world as this anthropomorphic agent, or as a bunch of different agents. And there are benefits, I think, to this. Certainly, like asking yourself how you relate to the world, what your relationship is. But the dark side of this, the thing to be cautious about this is that it, for one, it can be the source of a lot of flattery and self-aggrandizement when you think to yourself, um, even when you think that the weather is out to get you, like, of course the weather is bad today because I got to do this thing. It's like even when the outcome appears negative, it's still really flattering to think that for whatever reason the weather would care about you specifically, you know. Um, and so I think the potential danger here is to start maybe even subconsciously forming these relationships with these different forces that don't have any attention behind them. Uh, but nonetheless, you behave as though they do. And one of the one of the potential outcomes from this is developing almost like a kind of OCD. And I think there's certainly like a clinical OCD that deals with like a you know dopamine receptors not really doing the thing that they do in most people. Um, but yeah, but I think that there could be like a kind of narrative OCD that people could develop where if, again, if you're overly sensitive to the kind of hits and you come across a scenario where you're like, oh yeah, I flipped the light switch a bunch of times and then this good thing happened. It's like you could essentially fool yourself into thinking that there's all these connections where there are no connections, and then you sort of it's almost like at that point you start paying the price. You start you're essentially forced to make the sacrifice at the altar of these agents, these metaphysical agents, right? And because it's just probably random events, it's like not even the sacrifices won't even pay off every single time. So you're just going to be tormented. Like, why does the weather need to torment me? I did the thing. I did all the crazy, ridiculous OCD things, and still there must be something else that I'm not doing. It's just, I think it's got the potential to, yeah, just really spiral out of control. So yeah, be mindful of those kinds of relationships where those relationships do not exist. I think also with the card, because I mean, we got the Marseille card, kind of interesting. It's got a little phoenix underground, maybe, that's being unveiled. But then this one, we got these two characters. Maybe they're young lovers. That's often the interpretation, hesitancy, first meeting, that kind of stuff. But I really like the third character, that weird. Is it a griffin? It's kind of just the head and the wings, but I like to. An idea that I like to often subscribe to is that like there's a relationship entity. When you're in a relationship, you're one of the entities. The person you're in the relationship with, they're an entity, and there's a third entity that's the sort of composite of the two of you. But I like entertaining the idea that the relationship is a separate third being that essentially comes into existence every time you start a relationship with someone, whether it's platonic or romantic, intimate, whatever. Um, but yeah, I think in terms of what I'm talking about, the placing agency into things, I think in relationship to the graphic on the card, I think this could also manifest itself in the sense that you could try to interact with and appease this this entity of the relationship. Like some people, when they say, well, I just got to put myself out there and I'll find love. When some people say that, they're purely thinking of a statistical kind of gamble. They're like, well, I got to keep going out. I'll keep meeting people. Then maybe eventually I'll meet the one. But when some people say it, they have this idea that like true love is some sort of a force that watches over people and decides who is worthy and unworthy of meeting the love of their life, and that they need to work on themselves and do things not for their own benefit directly, but to prove themselves to this other entity and appease them. And again, when this doesn't work out, you know, you maybe you tell yourself, I'm gonna learn how to cook, and then I'll meet the right person, and and you learn how to cook, and then you don't meet the right person, and then often the reaction is, well, fuck cooking. I guess cooking wasn't the thing. When you know really doesn't hurt at all that you learn how to cook, and you shouldn't turn your back on that skill. You should still be able to enjoy cooking instead of now having this relationship with the idea of cooking as like that thing that was a total failure in transforming you into the thing that would be deemed worthy by this, agent of love, this like angel of relationships or something. So yeah, I think that in some cases people have that kind of uh, yeah, that same kind of, as opposed to with the weather or whatever. You know what I'm saying. Now, opportunities. All right, Page of Swords. This guy's pretty cool. Could be a girl. It's just an archetype, in my opinion. I see this as someone who is uh, really open minded. And it's the kind of open mindedness that I think could be just almost stupid and naive. In the short video, I said, you know, their open mindedness could be at the point of the ridiculous or the surreal. But it's like it's a person. This archetype describes an individual that is just the way that they're interacting with the world around them in terms of how they categorize and try and understand things and try and label things. They don't leave any possibilities untested. Why does something happen? It could be literally anything, and they're perfectly happy entertaining all these different ideas. And sometimes they just have crazy, ridiculous notions about things. And they're generally very young. They could also be, doesn't have to be a young person in terms of their age, but um, yeah, I've certainly met some older people that still had this childlike wonder of the world, which doesn't just stop at wondering why things are. It also involves interacting with with the kind of curiosity that the world around you is, interacting with that with like hypotheses. And it's just sometimes those hypotheses are just so ridiculous and hilarious or adorable. And I think that, I mean, if you have kids, or if you have friends or family members that have kids, if you have the opportunity to hang out with kids in a socially acceptable fashion, I certainly think that that could be an interpretation of the opportunity here. And otherwise, it could just be, you know, young-minded, open-minded individuals. I certainly think the opportunity in interacting with this person is having some sort of breakthrough, learning something really useful, maybe solving some sort of situation that you've been stuck on, getting some idea, getting some inspiration. But yeah, it's really just interacting with this kind of super open-minded individual. They're gonna, it's the archetype is that they're super open-minded and they're not very smart, they're not very well informed, and so you have to, you know, the ideas they have should be held in high authority because you know, they're just spraying ideas all over the place. But nonetheless, as an opportunity to get in on some of that inspired, enthusiastic, open-minded energy, I think that's a great opportunity, particularly with kids. As I mentioned in the short video, it's like if you're ever hanging out with kids that are at that stage where they're just like constantly asking like why something is, what something is, they just want answers. One of the best things you could do, I think, or certainly one of the most entertaining, is to ask them what they think. So when they're like, "What is this?" They're pointing at some object they're unfamiliar with. You're like, "I don't know. What do you think it is?" And like, man, kids come up with the craziest hypotheses. Sometimes you could tell they have some ideas and it's like from some TV show or something that they saw. But in those cases where you really, you a kid gets caught off guard and they're interacting with something they have no idea with, and you're like, you got to be supportive and enthusiastic. You're like, it's you have to acknowledge that like trying to theorize what things are, how things work, that like that's a fun game. There's no wrong answers. We're just spitballing here, right? But yeah, if you get a kid like fully on board and inspired to start just spewing theories and hypotheses, yeah, they have some crazy fucking ideas. Um, but yeah, so I think yeah, this is not the kind of archetypal individual that you want to mistake the volume of their ideas for quality of ideas, right? Like there are one of the mistakes with, let's say, adults that would fit this archetype is one of the mistakes they sort of make and that you can make with them is sometimes people, they'll have an idea, and by the sheer virtue of the fact that they had an idea, they think it's a great idea. Like they mistake novelty for quality or validity. Um, One of the things that I learned the hard way through a lot of through a lot of you know painfully long hours in creative fields, and what I've learned from a lot of my friends also that like graphic designers, writers, stuff like that, is that you really got to get a grip on that feeling where you get your first idea and you're like, this is great, um, all of the professionals that are actually respected for their ideas, paid well for their ideas, any one of them will tell you that, you know, you have that first idea, great. Now write down another 59 ideas. And by the time you're done, guaranteed that first one will not seem like the best one. It's a starting point, but there's a long process of cranking out ideas. Now, this is just as far as it applies to the suit of swords. If we were talking about something like wands, which is this like, it's all about the intuitive, it's all about just sort of like pouring out and acting on that intuition, that'd be a different matter. In that case, the opposite is true, where it's like, you know, you go with your gut. Like, let's say, especially with something like martial arts, it's like you got to surrender to your reflexes and instincts. If you start trying to think too much, when you're sparring or competing or something like that. It just slows you down too much. But yeah, in this case, in terms of paying paying your respects to the ideas of these types of archetypal individuals, that's not what they're great for. That's not where they're really useful or valuable in life. It's just the it's just the sheer volume of ideas, all the different places that you might have not have ever thought to look to or consider ideas from. These are the individuals that can open up those opportunities. I'm going to wrap things up there. Thanks for watching. Drop me a like if you enjoyed the video or got something cool out of it. Comment free reading if you would like to be entered into a weekly draw for a free one-on-one reading. And have a nice day, and I'll be back tomorrow. Take care.